maybe do some customization on the software or the hardware to be able to meet and work with users' requirement. And what's an example that I can, look at giving you is the case of, say, for example, where a few years back, we deployed a CRM within the organization, which is customer relationship management system. And that CRM essentially, when we deployed, we were quite excited. But when it came to the deployment, there was a lot of customization which required to be done because we are going to use it not as a sales system, but as a student management system, which will allow us to keep records, update records, create records, and at the same time we wanted to use it for productivity and doing away with manual work. So a lot of customization had to be done in the system, and that happened over a period of time, and that required somebody like bringing in a programmer to be able to do so. So in such cases, you would look at essentially the process of ensuring that how do we, if at all, if there is sometimes, a programmer required, then, in some cases you would need to get a person on board who would essentially be having the, skills to be able to help in that implementation. And then the merit and distinction tasks are really related to, we need to take up a specific project, which is an example that I've given, like if you are implementing a CRM in the organization as a management tool, how would you go about it? And you need to create a bit of a Gantt chart or a table to explain some of these steps, how this requirement came up and how it will be, say, for example, how you have selected the right solution, what is the planning and strategy part of it, how it has been customized if required, and how would training and development be done internally for the employers or the users as employees, and then finally a deployment. And that would be, shown up as a table to say how this would work in terms of a project that you're going to implement in a time-bound basis. But not the least, we are also looking at understanding in the distinction part how this solution could be deployed, how this could be useful, and how this could be essentially, something at the end of the day, when you have deployed the solution, how do you think this solution is going to be useful for the organization? So these are the bits that we're going to be looking at covering today in our discussion. And let's start off with a few PowerPoint slides that I've got for this particular learning outcome. And let's go into a bit of discussion with this. Now, in order to ensure that we cover up all the assessment criteria, what I've done at my end is obviously created a bit of a detailed, bit in terms of these slides, so that you are able to get the nitty-gritty of what we need to cover in terms of the indicative content given, towards the unit specifications last page. So it talks about things which are related to each of the bullet points. And what we're going to be doing is looking at covering most of it in our discussion today. So feel free to ask me questions or queries, and I'll try and elaborate some parts of this with examples that, hopefully should be practical examples for you to be able to understand the assessment criteria. Now, one thing which I want to start up with, which talks about, understand the implementation of digital solution, which is where the learning outcome is, the overarching, part of the learning outcome. So if I have to pick out two words, which are new that we have looked at in this learning outcome, is digital solutions. So I've started out with a bit of a definition of digital solution, because we are reading about digital technologies, which essentially means combination of hardware, software, applications, networks and other bits that can allow us to create these solutions. So it's important for us to understand what is a digital solution. Now, if we look at a textbook definition, it refers to the use of technology to solve problems, improve processes, and create new value. Now, if I put it this way, why do we think we deploy IT within an organization or any sort of IT related application or infrastructure? Because you want to do these things more efficiently. If there are repetitive things which are to be done, then technology helps you do away with that monotonous nature of work. You are looking at building productivity into the organization so that things can be shared and easily electronically shared. And in such cases, you would look at deploying a solution which will allow you to essentially look at solving issues or problems. It will help you to improve your existing standard operating processes within the organization. And last but not the least, it will help in creating value or revenue for the organization. Now, there are lots of examples that we can look at, and what customers have done today in varying sectors. They have looked at deploying cloud computing, CRM software, artificial intelligence, and enterprise resource planning systems, which communicate and talk to each other to be able to, provide a single dashboard or a single system from which everything can be managed. So if you look at today's CRM systems like Salesforce, Zoho, HubSpot, there are lots of them available in the market. But generally, when you look at these systems have the ability to be able to integrate your phone calls, integrate your sales process, your engineering, production, forecasting, purchase, inventory processes, which means depending on what permissions are provided at user level and the department or the function that you're working within the organization, you're able to see a seamless, connected flow of how things are moving within the organization. And this is an example of a great solution which companies at some stage deploy after the initial stage of their startup, because they then need systems, and you need systems to be able to take care of processes. And these systems and processes allow the output of the company to be measured or uniform. So you would not want this to be different. A simple example that I would give you is when you look at companies which go into mass manufacturing, assuming a car manufacturer introduces a new car model, first a replica would be produced, or a prototype would be produced. After the prototype, they will, obviously go ahead and do production of one particular model. It'll be tested, it'll be refined, changed, and once that model has been approved, it's meeting the specification. What they will then do is put it into mass production. Now, mass production would require obviously lots of things. So the factory would already be existing, but in the factory, they might need to do an introduction of a new assembly line or introduction or change in some processes because this is a new model. So a car being produced, but they've decided to produce a sedan version or a longer version of the car, which could be a 4x4 in some cases. And in those cases, the production line would need to be changed or amended to run that to be able to mass produce. So in such cases, you would look at the employment or deployment of digital solutions, which the company would do. Now, obviously, if the solution has been understood and is being looking at deployed, what you want to do is what are the reasons why you want this to be done. So there are some overarching benefits that we do talk about when we deploy some of these solutions, which are related to technology in particular. So one is improving efficiency. A simple example, a very simple example that I'll give you. If you imagine working within an office and there are only 2 or 3 of you as employees as working. Now, in such cases, what you would generally see, if there are only 2 or 3 employees working, a small network printer would be okay. But if you have a job which requires a lot of printing to happen and there are 3 people sharing one printer, the printing speed will also matter. So in some cases, you would have an inkjet printer, but in some organizations, after inkjet, they would upgrade you to a black and white laserjet, which will have more printing speed. So inkjet printers produce 5 or 6 pages per minute. There are obviously printers which print up to 30, 35 pages per minute as well, but they are not for heavy duty printing. But assuming if you were printing out sales quotations or some sort of flyers or other bits, and there were 3 people using it and you had a printer which prints only 5 or 7 pages per minute, then there would be a queue for you to wait to get hold of your printout. In such cases, you would feel, okay, I've done a print, it'll take a couple of minutes for it to be printed. And then you'll be looking at wasting time or toiling time because the printer isn't efficient enough. So in some cases, the company would then decide, okay, we have a lot of printing load, and they would decide that we need to bring in a professional copier or a printer, and they implement something and bring across a new device, which is a copier with 40 pages per minute speed or 60 pages per minute speed, and you find suddenly the efficiency of how you're looking at doing your job improves. As another simple example of that would be if you had a machine that you work, which is an old PC with a slow processor and a lower, say, as 8 GB RAM, but your applications today require a faster processor and more memory. But if the upgrades isn't provided or is not done or recognized by the IT department that an upgrade needs to be done, that could affect the efficiency of how the employee works. You might get a bit frustrated. Sometimes you would see the machine slows down, it hangs, I have to restart it, I have to close some applications. And in such cases, you would put a requisition to your manager to say, can my machine's RAM be upgraded, or can I get a new machine because my applications and the way I work in terms of my speed, and in order to look at completing jobs, I need a machine which is more efficient and more fast. So in such cases, you identify what solutions are required, and then major benefits of employing and upgrading and hardware would be improving efficiency, obviously enhancing customer experience. You want to stay competitive. We can look at an example of that: data management, and obviously cost reduction. So deployment of more and more systems, which is happening online by companies and organizations that you work with, currently is being done on cloud management because they don't want the cost of hardware maintenance and other bits to be paid in-house. And what they are doing is outsourcing that to, or basically moving that to the cloud, which allows applications to be accessed from anywhere, and applications are accessed in real time. They have real-time updates happening, and that means wherever you get access to data, you are able to access real-time data, which is most up-to-date versions to be able to work in. Now we'll go into details of that, and obviously steps for implementing digital solutions. What I've done is I've done a bit of a flow chart here, which basically explains that if an organization decides that we are upgrading the PCs, or we are upgrading to a new software, or we are changing our platform, then all this starts with the assessment, or needs assessment as we call it. And once the needs are identified and they are matched with the user requirements, you get into then looking at what would be the right solution in terms of shortlisting of software, trialing it out, doing a bit of a pilot with a few users, and then planning the implementation of the software within the organization. It could be a software application, it could be hardware upgrade, whatever it is happening, but you still go into that planning phase. And then sometimes if there is not a bespoke, not a off-the-shelf solution available, sometimes bespoke solutions have to be looked at. In such cases, you would need to look at customization and integration. Again, an example that I would give you is that, sticking to printer, if the organization was looking at buying a printer or a copier which would run and support number of employees, in terms of their printing function, one of the things they would also look at is future planning. 12 to 18 months down the line, would we need a stapling machine along with it? Would we need a machine which will be able to print and create flyers? So an add-on attachment to the copier will also be bought, and that would be useful because it will allow within the company the ability to be able to create flyers, do printing and stapling, and that is a customization which they will ask for as an attachment from the copier company when they place the order. And then in order for everybody to use the copier and maybe use that printing solution, training and development or training would need to be provided, and that training would essentially be given to employees once or twice in order to ensure that they're able to efficiently and effectively use that copier machine to be able to do the functions they want. And then finally it will be deployed in the organization, and then there will be some maintenance and other bits which will happen over a point in time to ensure that the machine is running smoothly or competitively in terms of doing its function, and obviously employees are able to get on with it. Now, that's the whole crux and summary of this learning outcome that we are looking at in terms of understanding the implementation of new digital solutions. Is that okay? Any questions on this so far?
No.
Okay. Now, let's look at the first bit, which is where we want to look at, understanding the part of how you would identify this particular solution. And once you've identified a particular solution that you want to implement, what would be the process through which you will run within the organization to run this as a project. Now, one of the things that we are quite aware of is that we do talk about project management. Now, project management is used as a technique to essentially deploy a new process within the organization. Now, that could be a process related, it could be a process, it could be hardware, it could be a software, it could be something which is being implemented within the organization that essentially relates to some sort of, I would say, a change which is being brought in. Now, the reason why this word project management is being introduced here is that even when changes are implemented within the organization from a technology perspective, whether it's upgrading the computer hardware across the board, whether it's looking at deploying a new network, whether it's looking at buying new hardware devices, whether it's looking at, say, for example, installation of applications like CRM system or ERP system within the organization, anything which involves the implementation of or bringing in of a new IT side of things would mean that you are looking at introducing it within the organization. And when you look at introducing such a system within the organization, you're looking at careful planning, resource allocation, monitoring, and evaluation to ensure that that implementation happens as per your timeline, as per the process that you're defining. And because budgets are always finite, that means, these things are related to finances of the organization. Assuming in an organization like ours in the college, we have 33 employees. If the decision is taken that we need to look at now upgrading to new Macs, each Mac is like 1,500 pounds. Now, if we do upgrade to, the Macs, 33 of these for all the employees, that would mean, a very large expense, which the college would need to look at undertaking. Now, when we look at this as an upgrade, we would need to look at a justification or a logic that would essentially be created within the department, within the IT department, to say, why do we need that upgrade? One, it could be the integration of artificial intelligence, which is coming in from Apple, and that is only available in new devices. Second, somebody in the organization, in the IT department, would have thoroughly tested that out to say, yes, there are meaningful advantages of using the new system because it allows the employee to become more efficient and more productive. And then there'll be use cases he or she would actually create to say, okay, it is helping in assessments, it is helping in teaching, it is helping in delivery, it is helping in administration, and these are examples. And these are a few of the examples which could be used as use cases if we do deploy, the newer part of the technology. Then you would be looking at costing. You would be looking at what will happen to the older versions of the Mac. And then you would also look at integrating and deploying this in a phased out manner, because the company might say, okay, we can't spend, like 45,000 pounds just because we have to upgrade this PC. So it might happen in a structured and a time layout manner wherein it'll start with, say, administration, then go to teaching, then go to a quality, and then go to, say, the top management, because they will see where the main benefits of this particular introduction of the new technology or the new platforms would essentially start first. And that is what we have to look at, talking about in the first assessment criteria. So how do we outline this particular project in terms of, deployment, or if there is a decision to be taken, how are they basically going to be put into practice? So we go through these 5 stages of initiation, planning, implementation, monitoring and control, and feedback and closure. So at some stage, once every system is upgraded, at some stage, the management would say that could you go ahead and obviously do a bit of checks to see if everybody is happy with the upgrades they have received. Is there a steep learning curve? Have they had enough training to be able to work on these systems? Do they themselves feel that there is increase in efficiency in production because of the faster systems or built-in AI which is coming into the systems? And what are the cases in which they are using it for, which makes it easier for them to compile and do some of these tasks? So that has to be outlined in terms of this particular task. You might have to take in an example after slide 1 and 2, understanding of it. But in order to discuss this, maybe in the assignment, you might then have to look at taking up a small example of maybe an upgrade to a telephone system. Like most companies are moving now to cloud-based VoIP platform, which is voice over internet protocol, no physical phones. You can receive your phone on mobile. It also means that the organization does away with a desk phone. There are no wires and cables required. It works, seamlessly within the office, outside the office, and that could be a system which the company decides to employ, because it means they are going to look at saving costs. They are going to be going to a mobile data plan. It means they are not dependent to a location. And last but not the least, newer technology would mean that voicemails can be recorded, calls can be recorded, it can be retrieved, monitored, and those kind of services which are not there in a normal telephone system might be useful, because the company is now upgrading to a new one. So here in this case, what you have to look at is think of a upgrade or think of a plan which the organization would want to deploy, and then talk about outlining it, how this would be a case of the company using the ICT upgrade or change within the organization, but implementing it using a particular project or a methodology, essentially, which will be a project management methodology or a process. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the second part is, if we were to look at sticking to one example of, if the organization was looking at, I would give an example of implementing, for example, upgrade to the VoIP system, which is telephony. They are upgrading the telephony to, say, a voice over internet protocol telephony system. Now, one, because in the first task we've established, so for this particular learning outcome, what you have to remember is that when you do this assignment, we will do a discussion tomorrow on this. The task 5 of your assignment brief will require these 5 tasks to be done in learning outcome 5. Here it will be useful if you pick up one particular solution or an organization and then talk about it in all the tasks as an example, because most of the tasks are asking about outlining and explaining. So the second part, what we've done is, in the first part, we look at maybe saying that as a scenario, we are looking at an organization upgrading to the latest VoIP-based telephone system in the office. Now, in the second part, we need to outline the developmental process. Now, what will be the developmental process the organization will undertake to implement this solution within the organization? Now, one of the things which the organization would need to do with the company would be to say, okay, we need this voicemail to be enabled as a voicemail on the system. So when you switch off your system after the working hours, then the voicemail, if anybody calls the office line, should also hear into a voice, should hear a recorded message which will say, our office hours are between 9 to 5 p.m. and currently we are closed. Should you have an urgent query, write an email to this, or if you need to reach us urgently for any services or issues, then you can call this emergency number. Now, this is a recorded message which the company would need the organization supplying the system to create or configure and record and configure in the let's say the system itself, which is being deployed. Now, you would also see sometimes the company would also say that we need a voiceover, which is like a promotional message, which will run when you put the call on hold. Again, this will be like a bespoke message which the company would provide as a message to the provider, and they would need to go back and get a voiceover or a recording done through a professional artist to say this is what needs to be recorded, and when somebody puts the phone on hold, the customer on the other end would actually be hearing this particular message. Now, these are examples of how the company would require maybe some part of a bespoke development to happen to the voice over internet protocol or telephony system. Now, in such cases, what you have to do is you have to outline the process of why this development is required. So maybe as a bit of a introduction, explain what is the requirement within the organization. And now, if one of the other examples that I'll give you, another point of development which the organization would say is that, okay, when somebody calls this particular number, they should be given further options. That option 1, speak to sales; option 2, speak to marketing; option 3, speak to accounts; option 4, speak to administration, or press 0 to go to the reception. Now, these kind of follow up, flow charts in terms of what happens if this is pressed or what happens when that is picked up, is something which you would need to define in a paper. And once that has been defined, that will then be provided to the company, and the company would then look at creating this bespoke, like a flow. And in some cases, it will require programming. In some cases, it will require recording with a professional artist. And in some cases, it will, once it has been recorded, it will be tested, and then it will be programmed into the EPBX system or the cloud-based system for the organization. That process is what you would need to outline by doing it in a way wherein you'll say requirement gathering, then you will say design. You might use parts of it, not all. Then you would say how this development would happen, how the testing would happen, and then finally what the deployment would include. This could be an example that you could take off a website as well. Depending on, say, as an example, as a college, we decide that we are going to do a new website, and the new website would have, this process of starting with learning outcome 5. First, we'll say, let's look at why a new website is required. So you'll go back to the learning outcome 1, and in learning outcome 1, you'll talk about why this is required. You will do some, say, bit of understanding why initial assessment, I would say why there's a need for a new website. Then you'll go to looking at the new website should have this solution, like e-commerce should be built in so that customers can buy a course online. Then you'll go into planning, testing, training, and then a full rollout at some stage. While commercially launching the website, it is available to customers. But you will go through this process of, shortlisting and outlining a project management technique, and that would be part one. Now, in part two, you would outline and detail the process. So you'll go with requirement gathering. Why is there a requirement? Why are we? One requirement could be we are lacking behind competitors. Other competitors have a good website, or it is more informative. It has AI integrated into it, things like that. And then using that as an example, you could essentially explain, the task two, which is outline the developmental process. Is that okay?
Yeah.
The third part is explain the importance of production planning. Now, when we do talk about you assigning budgets to the company, web agency, which is designing a website, if we stick to that example, at some stages you would ask the web design company to produce what are called, mood boards, or essentially some sort of, mock-ups. The mock-ups would be the designs that you want to see. What would be the color scheme? What is the flow of menu system on the website? What kind of backend e-commerce shop are you using, or a commerce cart are you using? What would be the website design based on? Will it be HTML5? Will it be responsive, open on mobile and tablets? And essentially you'd be looking at basically discussing with the agency to say, before you get into the production of it, that means actual designing and coding of the website, what we want to be able to understand is, can you give us a snapshot through a scrapbook, through a mock-up, through some sort of mood boards to say how would the website look like and what would the project entail? Now, in that you would ask for resources, timeline, you would ask for cost, you would ask for things which are going to be required in terms of information that is required from you as a company to the agency to be able to make the website. And then when can you see a working prototype of the website? So before it is commercially launched, it will be available to users internally, a few set of users who would commercially look at the website and essentially give further feedback and test it out to see whether it's working to this to the description of the project as initially discussed or not. Now, in such cases, when the production tends to start, that means coding and programming will start, you would essentially look at making sure that things which are required from your side to be provided to the agency are given, which could be things like, write-ups about us and, write-ups of the management, pictures, existing data that you want on to be put on the website. There will be a quotation which the website agency would do, which will give you a bit of a project brief. It'll give you a timesheet. It'll give you a budgeting sheet. It'll give you a requirement sheet. And then it will also tell you very clearly what could be the significant milestones on which you would be able to release payment. Now, this could be a big project. That means depending on the size of the company or the organization, it could be a project which could require tens of thousands of pounds. So you would say, okay, the first part after the quotation has been approved, when you do the mock boards or mock-ups and you give us a resource plan and a timesheet in terms of how this would proceed, we'll release 10% of the payment. Then once the programming starts, and obviously some part of the coding has been done, some sections of the website are ready, we'll release another 25%. Once the full development of the website is done and it is meeting the project brief which was initially created, we would further release 30% of the payment. The balance set of the payment, which is 25%, would be released once the website is fully tested. It has gone through the testing phase and it is at the commercial stage of launch. Because in such cases, the company might also say that, the agency might also tell the company that, okay, before we launch it, we need the hosting to be sorted, we need the domain to be transferred, and a couple of other costs which needs to be associated are done, and final improvements as per the client requirements have to be integrated. That means I don't like the color of this, or maybe some fonts have to be changed. Those nitty-gritties are ironed out, and that at that stage, once that is ready and the client signs it off, what will then happen is that you will then be ready to commercially launch the website. And that would be involved in what is called production planning. Now, sometimes projects could overrun. That means they have given you a timeline that, okay, by such and such date, we'll be able to finish most of the coding, but it is taking time because the brief has changed, requirements has changed. There could be, other pitfalls that the company could have or the agency could face in terms of, costs and timelines which they're given maybe are to be exceeded or are going more than what was anticipated because of the fact that clients have given in more requirements or have changed it to a particular requirement. And in such cases, what will happen is you will need to readjust the timeline, costs, and resources in order to ensure that the project is still on board. And that is where you would require this production planning to happen. So somebody as a project manager would be looking at, or IT person would be looking at, managing this project. So IT person might be looking at managing it from a point of view of requirements, resources, IT side of things, but a project manager might be managing it from a point of view of resources, financial planning, timelines, looking at requirements. Maybe some assets need to be bought. For example, today because of copyright issues, you'd be looking at creating or asking agency to create specific images for you, which are proprietary, or look at asking them to buy stock footage images, and they would require further budgeting to be done. And in such cases, this would be managed overall by the project manager. And that process that you look at, which is the importance of production, when everything has been approved by the agency, for the agency, by the company, and it gets into production phase, what are the key bits that are required to be monitored would be covered in this particular task. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, the next assessment criteria talks about, how do you look at hardware and software co-development? Now, sometimes website, as an example, as I mentioned, is only hard software development, but there could be some bit of hardware which also needs to be upgraded on the company's side in order to take that new website to be functional. Now, if we assume that the website is hosted internally, if I talk about big companies like Apple, Google, some of the large companies like Tesco and all, they have hosting of their websites on their own servers, within their own IT department, within their own head office. Now, these are billion-dollar companies, and obviously they do not go out and do cloud-based hosting of services, but some companies like still run their websites and have them hosted on CDN servers or Amazon Web Services, because there they have service level agreements or SLAs, which basically ensure that it's like having full access to them, but also ensuring that there is minimal downtime to these services. But if we assume that an organization is hosting, managing, and running the hardware side of the things also within their own company premises, then in such cases, developing a new website would also mean that the hardware would need to be checked for compatibility. Would the hardware be able to look at taking up the load? And in such cases, what you are going to do is basically see whether is the development happening on the software. You're also going to check the appropriateness and compatibility of the hardware required. Like I know myself that in some cases, sometimes on our cloud-based server, we need to upgrade to certain applications to be certain versions of software we need to upgrade to in order for us to be able to run applications. So for example, the learner management system now requires a PHP 8.0 or above. It also sometimes requires the Apache side of the system to be upgraded to a minimum software version of 5. Now, if your current cloud-based servers are not having those updated firmware and hardware installed, then in such cases, the hardware would need an upgrade. Now, if the website is responsive, if the website is also running on mobile devices, it needs to be able to handle a load of maybe between 5,000 to 20,000 users at the same time, then the hardware might need an upgrade. That means you might need to upgrade your RAM on the server. You might need to increase the storage on the server. Your server might need to have what is called an image of the website on multiple servers. Now, assuming if it's being accessed in Asia, in Europe, in Americas, you would have load balancing, which will happen through CDN networks. And that would mean that the website is co-hosted on the domain, but a replica of that is co-hosted on the CDN servers, which allows it for the website to do load balancing as far as incoming traffic is coming to the website. So in such cases, you would need to look at hardware as well. And in terms of that, when I say hardware, I mean RAM, servers, internet, bandwidth, You might need to look at caching. You might need to look at security, SSL. You might need to look at encryption. You might also need to look at, two-factor authentication or variation. In some verification, in some cases, the website supports e-commerce-based transactions. Your database will have to be robust itself. There should be a backup running as well at some point in time, because if there is too much load and the database gets corrupted, then the backup can restore that particular database, and it should allow seamless transactions to happen when customers are purchasing, anything on your site. Now, in such cases, you would be looking at checking the codependency of the software with the hardware. And in such cases, you would look at things like, is the software compatible when it is running on the cloud and when it is running locally on the machine? You would check for hardware, whether the hardware is able to take the load. That means, can it handle the load of so many users logging into the website at the same time? Whether it works across platforms, which is Windows, Linux, or for example, Apple OS platforms. And those would require, software/hardware codependencies to be checked in order to ensure that the applications that you're installing or the upgrades that you're doing or the software that you're installing are all workable, right? So specific focus is on hardware. When you look at hardware, you're looking at these aspects: the CPU, the VRAM, which is video RAM, hard drive, your RAM in the hardware itself, whether it's a PC or a server, whether it's on the cloud, and then obviously compatibility issues with regards to certain devices which are connected to it. Is that okay? Any
Yes,
questions
please.
on this?
No, please.
Okay. The next one is the use of programming. Now, I initially gave an example, that if as an organization you are deploying a software solution, and that software solution off the shelf that you pick up might not have might not meet all the requirements. So in some cases, what you would do is probably pick up something from the market which is having or meeting 80-90% of your requirements. The balance part of it, which is not available, you are basically going to look at asking a programmer or a company or an agency to essentially come in and program those to be able to work and make those then features available. So an example that I gave initially was of CRM. Now here, when you look at the CRM system, what you're looking at essentially is that when we do talk about the CRM, now CRM is a software which is a standard software, which they are selling it to so many companies and customers across the world. Now, in some cases, what you look at is that let me give you another example. Now you have Apple and Android, Google essentially, they have made available what is called an SDK, a software development kit. Now, SDK is made available to programmers and to companies which are developing applications to run on their platforms. Now, if they do not provide the SDK and some minimum guidelines to be able to allow them to tweak some of the basic minimum programming of the software in the SDK, then they would not be able to produce as third-party companies softwares or applications which run on their platform. Now, Apple is not designing those applications, and neither is Google, but there are over 1 billion apps which are available now on their platforms which are essentially running on them. So in such cases, what they've done is they've made available the SDK kit, which is available to software developers, organizations, which will pick that kit up. It will give them the integrated infrastructure or the architecture of the software, and that will allow them to do programming using Cocoa or Python and create those applications, test those applications before they are listed back onto the portals or the iStore or the Google Play Store. Now, in such cases, you would require programming. Now, a smaller example of this, which I will give you, would be that, which I said earlier, if we stick to the CRM example, if a company deploys the CRM, there is automation, there is workflows, there is bits and pieces which they would want to do integration of with other softwares which are in the organization. And in such cases, they would need third-party programmers to be coming in and doing some programming. Excuse me, that would allow the CRM part of it to work with the application. An example that I would give here is, if you look at an example of programming, sometimes CRMs do need connectivity with other applications. Now, there's a software called Zapier. Have you heard of Zapier?
No, please.
Okay. There's a software called Zapier, and Zapier as an organization allows creation of Zaps, which means if you have a particular application and you want to connect that application with your CRM, but you have API and some technical, let's say not technical, you have APIs and you are able to program some part of the interface of your application with your application, the other application that you're trying to connect. So in between, Zapier allows that, an interface to happen. Now, in such cases, you would require some bespoke programming. One of the examples that I will give you is, as an organization, we use Zoho CRM, and in Zoho CRM, we wanted to look at, certain aspects that we would want to give access to external partners or external contractors. Now, in such cases, we wanted to create a portal. That means they can log into our CRM, they can input the information, they can view the information, but they can't delete the information. Now, there is a way through which this can be done in the CRM software, because CRM softwares allow creation of what are called external portals, which would be given to partners, suppliers, or any sort of supply teachers, which are basically outside the organization. You don't want to give the access to the full system, but you want to give them an access to a smaller part of the system, which allows them to work and get access to the information. Now, in such cases, we had to deploy a programmer. That programmer, we had to give them a brief. That brief was detailed in terms of what all functions the portal should be able to do and how that portal should work and what interface it should have. Once we gave that brief, the programmer went away. They looked at certain, installation of, let's say, applications on Zoho. And after that installation was done, they created a program code, which then allowed these applications to run seamlessly with the CRM. And in such cases, that allows now an external partner to essentially come in and see some parts of our information or provide information through this platform. Now, what that has done is that it has allowed us to basically do away with a lot of data entry or passing of information which is required to be done on emails. Now, this has meant that we had to get somebody in who was competent enough as an agency or a group of programmers who understood the requirement and then created a code which was stitched in. The code created was a front end, and that front end was then knitted, or I would say configured with the back end of the CRM, and that allowed this functionality to be made available to external contractors. Now, in such cases, it required some programming. That programming essentially meant that the programming was done in C++, and also some interface was done in Microsoft platform, which allowed the usage of SharePoint and Writer to be able to use and then give access to external people who wanted information coming in from the CRM. And this meant that we had to create a portal, which is like a website. The website, people used to log in with username and password. Once they were logged into username and password, they were then able to input the information, because there was creation of forms, and these forms allowed data to be collected, obviously then stored onto a database, and that was then migrated internally by the application every hourly to ensure that the data was then internally visible to employees, relevant employees within the CRM. And in such cases, we had to get this programming done. That programming was done once, and once that programming was essentially done, this now as a feature, which is called the portals, is now available to external partners. So there's an element of programming sometimes involved in when the organization decides to get solutions installed. And some of these solutions, if they are not available over the shelf or over the counter, then in such cases, obviously, customized programming or bespoke programming has to be done in order to create the interface and in order to link the two systems together. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Good stuff. So that, essentially brings us to the end, of our discussion on Learning Outcome 5. Now, for Learning Outcome 5, the merit and the distinction criteria require us to look at taking an example, and that would require a bit of detailing. So the 5M1 talks about range of project management tools that can be used to essentially, implement IT projects. Now, you have lots of project management tools like Microsoft Project, Gantt chart, Smart Sheets, and these project tools can be used to implement IT projects within the organization. So here, my suggestion would be to look at a particular tool and then look at what could be used for planning, what could be used for collaboration, what could be used for managing risk, and finally how these tools, the tools can be used essentially to show how the solution can be deployed within the organization. So I have given one or two examples, for each set of steps that are required to be taken, and that you would need to read and then look at an appropriate example that you'll come up with, which you can justify for the merit output. And similarly for distinction, once you've come up with a solution, what you have to do is give example of how this can be deployed within the organization. So here in today's discussion, I've picked up some examples of, say, CRM system, a telephone system, a company moving from normal desk-based telephone system to VoIP, or a company employing a CRM system. And these could, or a company looking at creating a new website, which is with an e-commerce platform. Out of the three examples that I've explained and given, you could choose one to actually show how a new website can be deployed, or how a new phone system can be deployed, or in some cases, how you would deploy a CRM system within the organization. And those steps that you talk about, which we have covered in 5.4, are actually an extension to the distinction criteria. But here you're not looking at covering it theoretically or descriptively, but looking at taking an example, an actual example, and then discussing it to achieve this particular criteria.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Good stuff. So what I will do is, along with this particular, learning outcome, I'm going to try and make available, one or two reading articles, and they would be useful for you to essentially look at, doing a bit of reading for this learning outcome. So if I put one or two case studies, so let me say, so what I would want to do essentially would be to try and give you, links to one or two case studies. And these case studies that I would say, would be something that I would suggest that you go ahead and read, because what it will do is, when you do read these case studies, it will give you some ideas and practical examples of how, transformation, or deployment of these digital solutions can be done within a particular organization. So I'll put them here for you. Just give me 1 second. And this is what I will also upload, on the website, on Moodle, just under this particular learning outcome, because what it would be useful for you to do is basically read them and see what we've discussed today is a practical basis through which essentially, you can see that how big companies, small, medium companies, big companies essentially look at deploying these solutions, within their organization. And why do they look at this particular solution? So I will also make available, downloads of it, so that you are able to, read them as PDFs, and they would be useful because they are going to be not, I would say, theoretical scenarios, but they are going to be actual usage scenarios. Now, one such example that we did a couple of years back, I think not couple, but 10 years back, was the implementation of e-learning solutions, learner management system within the organization, because we wanted, the learners to get most of the access to the data, online through our system. So these three case studies, if I show them to you very briefly, are the ones that I would suggest that you need to look at from a point of view of, ensuring that they are the bits that you go through, for looking at reading a bit more on this particular learning outcome. So let me show this to you now. So this is the first case study, which is for a biopharmaceutical company called Ascentis, and it explains what solution they employed, what were the challenges they faced, and what process they used as a bit of a case study. The second one is the implementation of educational technology in schools and colleges, which is a government report. It is quite an extensive report, but if you want to go into detail, you'll understand each of the areas that have been defined, in this particular report. And the third, again, is a bit of a case study, which basically says digital transformation in higher educational institutions, challenges and opportunities, and how does the organization go about, looking at switching to a digital solution. So one of them covers what is called digital transformation. The other one actually covers implementation. And the third one actually talks about, planning part of it. So if you look at the case studies that I've shortlisted, one of them is directly related to production planning, which is 5.3. This one is related to implementation, which is your assessment criteria, outline the process of implementation, which is 5.1. And this one, which is how it is useful, what are the benefits of it, importance is basically highlighted in this one, which is basically, so 5.1, this is your planning part of it, 5.3, and this one is 5.4, 2 and 4, implementation and planning. Okay. Good stuff. So I'll make these 3 case studies also available on Moodle. Along with that, the updated copy of today's presentation. And what I will do is discuss with you the assignment brief and how to go about doing the assignment, which will be done tomorrow, during same time on the Zoom session.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Thanks for joining in today, Clement, and I will see you tomorrow.
Okay.
Take care. Bye. Bye for now.
Bye.